My Mill smirked, handing a file to the judge. She's mentally ill. But my lawyer smiled and submitted the forensics of their forged documents and identity theft. When the judge read how they secretly trapped me, my husband turned pale because, welcome to Van's Rock Stories. Sometimes the people who promise to protect you are the very ones quietly taking your life away, piece by piece. If you've ever dealt with someone who made you question your own reality, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you enjoy emotional family stories with slow-burning twists, don't forget to subscribe. Now, let me tell you how I ended up in that courtroom. My name is Claire Dawson. I'm 30 years old, and the night I left my husband, I wasn't thinking about winning a case. I was just trying to make sure my baby and I made it through the night. Rosie was only 11 months old. She had fallen asleep against my shoulder while I sat alone at a bus stop, holding her as carefully as I could with my right arm. My left wrist had already started swelling after I slipped on the driveway while rushing out of the house. Every small movement sent a sharp pain up my arm, but I barely noticed it anymore. I couldn't stop watching the road. Every set of headlights made my heart race. Every SUV looked like it might belong to Ethan. I don't even know how long I sat there. Long enough for the cold to creep through my sweater. Long enough for Rosie to wake up once, blink at me, then fall asleep again after I kissed her forehead. "I'm sorry," I whispered. She sighed softly and rested her cheek against my shoulder. I kept apologizing without realizing it. Sorry for waking her. Sorry for taking her outside. Sorry for making everything difficult. A pickup truck slowed in front of the bus stop. My stomach dropped. For one terrifying second, I thought Ethan had found me. Then the driver's door opened. "Claire." I looked up. Marcus, my older brother. He walked toward me without rushing. His eyes immediately checked Rosie first, then landed on my wrist. "What happened?" I fell." He gave a small nod. "Can you stand?" I tried. The moment I put weight on my feet, my knees felt weak. Marcus caught my elbow before I lost my balance. "I've got you." Those 3 words almost made me cry. He didn't ask why I was sitting at a bus stop after dark with a baby. He didn't ask where Ethan was. He simply took off his jacket and wrapped it around my shoulders before opening the passenger door. "Come on." As soon as I got inside, warm air started blowing through the vents. The truck still smelled like coffee and cardboard boxes, exactly the way I remembered from when Marcus used to let me ride along during summer breaks years ago. For the first time that night, I felt safe enough to breathe. Marcus started driving. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was patient. After a few minutes, he spoke. "We're going to the clinic." "It's okay," I said quickly. "It's probably just a sprain. We're still getting it checked." "I don't want you wasting your evening because of me." He glanced at me. "This isn't wasting my evening." I looked down at Rosie. "Sorry." Marcus didn't answer right away. A few seconds later, my phone buzzed. The sound made my entire body tense. I pulled it out just enough to see the screen light up. "Ethan." I didn't answer. A moment later, another call. Marcus noticed. "You don't have to pick up." I swallowed. "What if he's looking for me?" Marcus kept his eyes on the road. "If he is, he can wait." My thumb hovered over the screen. What if he's worried? Marcus stayed quiet for a few seconds. Then he asked, "Is that what you think?" I frowned. "What do you mean? Do you think he's worried?" He paused. "Or do you think you're worried he'll be angry?" I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Because the truth embarrassed me. I wasn't imagining Ethan scared that something had happened to me. I was imagining how angry he'd be that I had left without telling him first. The thought hit me so hard I looked away, pretending to watch the passing streetlights. Why was that the first thing my mind went to? Why did I feel like I'd broken a rule? The clinic parking lot came into view a few minutes later. Marcus turned off the engine but didn't get out immediately. He rested both hands on the steering wheel for a second before looking at me. His voice was calm, gentle. "Claire." I finally met his eyes. He studied my face for a long moment before asking quietly, "What exactly were you running from?" Marcus didn't rush me. He waited. The engine was off, the clinic lights reflected across the windshield, and Rosie was still asleep in my arms. I looked down at her tiny hand. "I don't even know where to start." Marcus nodded. "Start with the last time you remember feeling safe." That question stayed with me for a second. "If you're still here," I said with a small smile, "leave a like and tell me in the comments if you've ever looked back at a relationship and realized the red flags only made sense years later." I took a slow breath. I met Ethan when I was 26. Back then, everyone loved him. He was funny without trying too hard. He remembered birthdays, held doors open for strangers, and never complained when he picked me up after late shifts at the community arts center where I worked. Even Marcus liked him. That's probably the hardest part to explain. There wasn't some obvious moment when he became a different person. Before we got married, he encouraged me to spend time with friends, supported my career, and constantly reminded me how proud he was of me. Life felt simple. Rosie was born almost 2 years after our wedding. Like every new parent, we barely slept. Our kitchen was always full of bottles, laundry never seemed to end, and coffee was usually cold before I finished it. Then Ethan's mother started visiting more often. Judith never showed up empty-handed. She'd bring homemade soup, groceries, or baby clothes. "I know you're exhausted," she'd tell me. "Let me help." Honestly, I appreciated it. She folded laundry while I fed Rosie. Sometimes she'd insist I take a shower while she watched the baby. At first, it felt like kindness. Then, little things started changing. One afternoon, I walked into the nursery and found Judith putting Rosie down for a nap. "I usually lay her down around 1, I said. Judith smiled without looking at me. "She'll sleep better this way." I almost corrected her. Instead, I said, "Okay." A few days later, I couldn't find the bottles I'd been using. "I bought better ones," Judith said casually. "These are much safer." Again, nobody asked me. Marcus listened quietly. "It sounds silly now," I admitted. "No, it doesn't. They were just baby bottles." "They weren't just bottles," he said. "They were your decision." I'd never thought about it that way. Because he was right. It wasn't about bottles. It was about getting used to someone else making choices for me. Whenever I mentioned it to Ethan, he always had the same answer. "Mom's only trying to help." "I know. So don't turn it into a problem." I wasn't trying to. "I just want everyone to get along." He never sounded angry. He sounded reasonable, and somehow that made me feel guilty for bringing it up at all. If Judith rearranged the kitchen, I should let it go. If she criticized how I dressed Rosie, she was only giving advice. If she invited people over without asking, she was just excited to see her granddaughter. One evening, I quietly told Ethan, "Sometimes it feels like I don't get to decide anything anymore." He put his arm around me. "You've been under a lot of stress." "I know. Can you do me a favor?" "What?" "Just don't make things awkward with Mom." So I nodded. Looking back, there wasn't one huge moment that changed my life. It was hundreds of tiny moments that slowly taught me my opinion mattered a little less each time. One morning, while Rosie was asleep, I decided to check my work email. My maternity leave was almost over, and I wanted to see if my manager had sent me anything. I entered my password. Incorrect password? I tried again. Same message. Thinking I'd forgotten it, I clicked Reset Password. A few seconds later, another message appeared. No account found with this email address. At first, I honestly thought it was some kind of technical issue. I tried signing in from my phone. The same message. I checked the spelling. Nothing. Just as I reached for my personal email to contact IT, Ethan walked into the kitchen carrying Rosie. He smiled like everything was completely normal. "What are you working on?" "My work email won't open." He didn't even look surprised. "Oh, that was it. Just, oh." "What do you mean, oh?" He set Rosie into her high chair before answering. "I took care of it." I frowned. "Took care of what?" "Your resignation." I laughed. Not because it was funny, because I genuinely thought he was joking. "My what?" "You were overwhelmed, Claire." He said it so calmly. "You told me every day how exhausted you were. Between the baby and the lack of sleep, I figured it was better to make the decision before your manager started asking questions." I stared at him. "I never asked you to quit my job." "You didn't have to." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Ethan, that was my career. You can always work again later." He reached over and squeezed my shoulder like he was comforting me. "Right now, Rosie needs you more." For a second, I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to yell. Another part wondered if maybe I really had complained more than I remembered. Maybe I had sounded like I wanted to quit. That thought stayed with me longer than it should have. A few days later, we had dinner at Ethan's parents' house. Judith was telling everyone how wonderful Ethan had been since Rosie was born. Then she smiled at me. I was so relieved when Ethan told us Claire decided to leave her job. Every conversation at the table stopped. His aunt smiled. "That must have been a hard decision." Judith answered before I could. "It was the right one. A baby needs her mother." Someone looked at me. "So, how does it feel to finally slow down?" I forced a smile. "It's different." Judith reached over and patted my hand. She was trying to do too much. Ethan knew she needed help making the right choice. Everyone nodded. Nobody asked whether I'd actually made that choice. I looked at Ethan. He just smiled politely and kept eating. On the drive home, I finally spoke. "You could have said something." I did. "No?" "At dinner." "What about it?" "You let everyone believe I resigned." "You did resign." "I didn't." "You would have eventually." His voice stayed calm. "You were exhausted, Claire." "I should have been the one to tell people." He sighed. "Does it really matter who said it?" I looked out the window for the rest of the drive. For the first time since we'd gotten married, I couldn't tell if we were having the same conversation, or two completely different ones. Weeks passed. Then something else started bothering me. Nobody from work called anymore. Not my manager. Not the volunteers I'd worked with for years. Not even Melissa, who used to text me almost every morning. I finally sent her a message. "Hey, is everything okay? Haven't heard from you in a while." Hours later, she replied, "I didn't want to bother you. Ethan said you were taking time away because your mental health had gotten pretty bad after the baby. He asked everyone to give you space." I read the message 3 times. My hands actually shook. I hadn't stopped hearing from people because they'd forgotten me. They thought they were respecting my privacy. Someone had made that decision for me too. I slowly looked around the living room. Rosie was playing on the floor. Ethan was in his home office with the door closed. The house was completely quiet. Yet somehow, I'd never felt more alone. A couple of days later, I stopped by the grocery store while Ethan was at work. Rosie was sitting in the shopping cart, happily chewing on one of her teething toys. I grabbed diapers, formula, fruit, and a few things for dinner. Nothing unusual. The cashier smiled as she scanned everything. "That'll be $112. I inserted my debit card. Transaction declined. I frowned. "Sorry." I tried again. The machine beeped a second time. Transaction declined. The cashier gave me an understanding smile. "It happens all the time. You can try again." I did. Same result. Transaction declined. I felt my face getting warm. "I'm sorry," I whispered as I reached for another card. That one didn't work either. Rosie started getting fussy in the cart. The line behind me grew longer. Finally, I called Ethan. He answered on the second ring. Hey. My card was declined. A short pause. Oh, right. I blinked. What do you mean, right? I moved everything into the joint account I manage. It makes budgeting easier. You didn't tell me. I was going to. So, how do I pay for groceries? I'll transfer money when you need it. It sounded so practical, so reasonable, until I realized what he'd actually said. Whenever I needed money, I'd have to ask. That afternoon, he transferred enough to cover the groceries. The next week, I needed diapers again. Ethan, can you send me another $100? Already? We're almost out. What did you spend the last transfer on? I started listing everything. Formula, diapers, baby wipes, milk, fruit. Halfway through, I stopped. Why was I explaining groceries like I was defending myself? He finally sent the money. Thanks. No problem. Just keep me updated next time. It became our routine. Every purchase, every errand, every dollar. Little by little, I stopped thinking of the money as ours. It felt like his. One Saturday morning, I couldn't find my car keys. I checked the kitchen, my purse, the diaper bag. Nothing. Ethan, have you seen my keys? They're probably with Mom. I frowned. Why? She borrowed your car. Again. Judith had started using my hatchback more often than I did. At first she'd ask, then she'd tell us she needed it. Eventually she simply took it whenever she wanted. I have a doctor's appointment this afternoon. Ethan barely looked up from his laptop. Mom won't be gone long. It's my car. He sighed. Claire, it is. I know. So why didn't anyone ask me? Because she needed it. That was somehow supposed to end the conversation. When Judith finally returned that evening, she walked inside carrying shopping bags. Oh, thanks again for letting me borrow it. I hadn't agreed. I looked at Ethan. He smiled like everything had worked itself out. A few weeks later, another change showed up. Workers spent an afternoon installing a new smart security system around the house. Extra cameras, door sensors, a keypad for every entrance. It'll make us safer, Ethan said. I didn't think much about it, until the notifications started. One afternoon I took Rosie for a walk around the neighborhood. Before I reached the end of the block, my phone rang. Hey, Ethan said. Everything okay? Yeah. I saw you leave. Oh. I just wanted to make sure. I brushed it off. Then it happened again. And again. If a package arrived. I saw something was delivered. If I opened the back door. Why'd you go outside? If I came home later than expected? Traffic? At first it sounded like casual conversation. Then I realized he always knew before I told him. One afternoon I ordered diapers online because they were on sale. The delivery driver had barely walked away when my phone buzzed. Ethan, package just arrived. What did you order? I stared at the message. He wasn't home. He was at work. Still. He knew. That evening, I finally asked, do you get alerts every time a door opens? Of course. Even when I'm home? He looked confused. That's how the system works. Can you turn them off? Why? I don't know. He smiled. You have nothing to hide. He kissed my forehead and walked away. For some reason, that sentence stayed with me longer than the kiss did. Not long after that, I realized I hadn't spoken to any of my own friends in weeks. I opened my contacts and scrolled until I found someone I hadn't talked to in months. Emma. We'd worked together for almost 4 years. I typed a simple message. Hey, I know it's been a while. Want to grab coffee sometime? I miss catching up. I hit send. The message showed as delivered. Then, nothing. No reply that day. None the next. Not even a thumbs up. I waited 3 days. Still nothing from Emma. At first I told myself she was just busy. Then I sent another message to someone else. Nothing. A third friend. Same result. It didn't make sense. These were people I'd known for years. We used to text almost every week. Even after Rosie was born, they'd checked in constantly. Then, silence. One afternoon, while Rosie was napping, my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it. The name on the screen made me stop. Elena Brooks. Elena and I had been friends since college. She'd become a family counselor, and even after life got busy, we always managed to stay in touch. I answered immediately. Claire? Her voice sounded relieved. Oh my gosh. You picked up. I smiled without realizing it. Of course. I've been trying to reach you for months. I frowned. What do you mean? I've texted, I've called, I even left voicemails. My stomach tightened. I never got any of them. There was a long pause. Then she asked quietly, Can I ask you something? Sure. Is Ethan around? I looked toward his home office. The doors closed. She lowered her voice. Claire, are you okay? I almost gave my usual answer. I'm fine. Instead, I hesitated. I don't know. Another silence. Then Elena sighed. I wasn't sure if I should tell you this. Tell me what? The last time I spoke to Ethan, he asked me to stop contacting you. I felt my grip tighten around the phone. What? He said you were dealing with severe postpartum mental health issues and needed complete space from everyone. I couldn't speak. He made it sound like every phone call was making things worse. I slowly sat down on the edge of the couch. So, that's why everyone's disappeared. I think people believed they were helping. For the first time in months, the silence around me made sense. Nobody had abandoned me. They'd been told to. After we hung up, I just sat there while Rosie played with her blocks on the rug. I kept thinking about every unanswered message, every invitation that stopped coming, every birthday I'd missed. Someone else had been telling my story. That evening, I walked into the garage looking for an old box of baby clothes Judith insisted we keep. Instead, I noticed a dusty plastic storage bin shoved behind a shelf. Inside was my old laptop. I hadn't touched it since before I got married. The charger was still wrapped around it. Out of curiosity, I plugged it in. The battery barely came to life, but after a few minutes, the login screen appeared. I typed in the password I'd used for years. It worked. Unlike my work account, this one was still mine. I opened my personal email. Dozens of unread messages appeared. Old newsletters, family photos, a few notes from former coworkers. Then I saw Elena's name. Again, and again, and again. There were months of unanswered emails. The newest one simply read, Claire, if you're reading this, please reply. I don't care if it's one sentence. I just need to know you're okay. I stared at the screen before finally typing back. I'm here, she replied less than 10 minutes later. Can you talk? We switched to a video call. The moment she saw my face, she smiled with obvious relief. I knew something wasn't right. I thought everyone had forgotten me. Nobody forgot you. I told her everything, not all at once. Just little pieces. The job, the money, the car, the cameras. She listened without interrupting. When I finally stopped talking, I expected her to say the words I'd secretly been waiting to hear. You need to leave. She didn't. Instead, she asked, Claire, do you have proof of any of this? I blinked. What? Texts, emails, bank notifications, anything. I don't know. Don't argue with them. She spoke calmly, like she was helping a client work through a problem. Don't accuse anyone, just start keeping records. I nodded slowly. Then she asked one more question. A question I hadn't even thought about until that moment. Claire, She leaned a little closer to the camera. Do you still have your IDs? Or did they take those too? I didn't answer Elena right away. Instead, I got up and walked to the hallway closet where we kept all our important documents. Or at least, where I thought we did. The folder was there. My passport wasn't. Neither was my birth certificate. Rosie's documents were gone too. I stood there staring at the empty space until I heard Ethan walking downstairs. I quietly closed the folder before he reached the hallway. That night, I messaged Elena from my old laptop instead of my phone. Some of my documents are missing. She replied almost immediately. Don't panic. Just start collecting facts. Pretend you're putting together a timeline. Facts are stronger than feelings. That sentence stayed with me. The next morning, I took my first screenshot. It was the notification showing my debit card had been declined. Then I photographed the transfer Ethan had sent afterward. A few hours later, I saved our text conversation where he'd written, "I'll move money whenever you need it." It didn't look dramatic. But together, the pieces started telling a story. Over the next couple of weeks, I quietly collected more. I saved emails. I photographed account alerts. Whenever a password suddenly changed, I wrote down the date. When the security system sent notifications, I took screenshots. I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. I was simply recording my own life. For the first time in months, I felt like I was doing something instead of just reacting. Around that time, I found a posting for a part-time library assistant. Only 3 afternoons a week. Close to home. It wasn't the event planning career I'd lost, but reading the description made something inside me wake up again. I filled out the application from my old laptop. A week later, I got an email. We'd like to invite you for an interview. I actually smiled. It felt strange. I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to look forward to something. I waited until dinner to tell Ethan. The library called today. He looked up. What library? I applied for a part-time position. His expression changed just enough for me to notice. You already have enough on your plate. It's only 3 days a week. What about Rosie? We can figure that out. He didn't argue. He simply nodded. We'll talk about it. That answer bothered me more than if he'd said no. A couple of days before the interview, I stopped by the grocery store again. This time, I checked my balance before going inside. Everything looked normal. I filled the cart with just a few essentials: milk, bread, diapers. The cashier scanned everything. I tapped my card. Card blocked. Please contact your bank. I froze. I hadn't received any warning. No notification. Nothing. I stepped aside and called Ethan. My card's blocked. Oh. His voice sounded almost casual. I had the bank freeze it. My heart dropped. You did what? There were some unusual transactions. There weren't any. I just wanted to be careful. Without telling me? I was going to. The call ended with him saying he'd sort it out later. I paid with the small emergency cash I'd started hiding in Rosie's diaper bag. It wasn't much. Just enough to get us home. When I reached the house, my stomach sank again. The keypad flashed red. Invalid code. I tried again. Same result. A few seconds later, the front door opened. Ethan stood there holding Rosie. Oh, right, he said. I updated the security code this morning. You forgot to tell me. I've had a busy day. He said it like forgetting to tell me was completely normal. I looked at him. Really looked at him. For months, I'd convinced myself every decision had some reasonable explanation. Standing outside my own house, locked out with grocery bags in my hands. I couldn't tell myself that anymore. That night, after Ethan and Rosie were asleep, I opened my old laptop. I looked at the growing folder of screenshots, photos, and saved messages. Then I opened a blank document. At the top, I typed one sentence: everything I remember. I sat there for a long time before finally admitting something to myself. I couldn't keep waiting for things to go back to normal. They already had. This was my normal. And before I closed the laptop, I made the decision I'd been avoiding for months. I didn't make that decision in a rush. For almost a week, I kept acting like nothing had changed. I packed one extra diaper whenever I left the house. I tucked copies of the screenshots into my old laptop. Every time Ethan left for work, I quietly checked whether any of my documents had reappeared. They never did. The morning of my library interview, I got dressed before anyone else was awake. I hadn't even finished making coffee when Ethan walked into the kitchen. "I canceled your interview." I turned around. "What?" I called them. I felt like I'd heard him wrong. "You called them?" "I told them there was a family emergency." "You had no right. You weren't ready to go back to work." Something inside me finally went quiet. Not angry, not scared, just certain. That afternoon, while Ethan took a work call upstairs, I packed one small backpack. Rosie's favorite blanket, a few outfits, my old laptop, the little envelope of cash I'd been hiding, the screenshots. Nothing else. I waited until I heard Ethan's office door close again. Then I picked Rosie up, opened the front door, and walked away. I didn't run at first. I just kept walking. When I reached the end of the block, my phone started vibrating. Ethan calling. I declined it. A second later, another call. Then another. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. I texted one person. "Marcus. Bus stop on Maple. Please come. Don't call." That was all. Less than 15 minutes later, his truck pulled up. He jumped out before the engine was even off. He looked at me, then at Rosie, then at the backpack. "You ready?" I nodded. He didn't ask another question. He simply took the bag from my shoulder and opened the passenger door. Halfway to town, I realized my wrist hurt more than I thought. I'd slipped on the front steps while leaving and caught myself awkwardly without letting go of Rosie. Marcus noticed me holding it. "We're stopping at the clinic." "I'm fine." "No, you're not." The doctor confirmed it was only a sprain, nothing was broken. But after checking my blood pressure and asking a few questions, she looked at me gently. "When was the last time you slept through the night?" I couldn't answer. Not because I didn't want to, because I honestly couldn't remember. Marcus answered for me. "Probably months." The doctor nodded slowly. "Your body isn't just tired, it's exhausted." Hearing someone say that out loud almost made me cry. Later that afternoon, Elena walked into Marcus's house carrying 2 large shopping bags. "I wasn't sure what Rosie needed," she said with an awkward smile, "so I bought a little of everything. Diapers, formula, baby snacks, a stuffed rabbit." I laughed for the first time in what felt like forever. "You didn't have to do all this." "I know." She hugged me anyway. Accepting help turned out to be harder than I expected. I kept apologizing. "I'm sorry you had to leave work. I'm sorry Marcus had to drive all this way. I'm sorry everyone has to deal with this." Marcus finally interrupted. "Claire." I looked up. "You don't have to earn being helped." Nobody had ever said that to me before. That night, Rosie fell asleep in the portable crib Elena had borrowed from a neighbor. I lay down on the guest bed expecting to hear Ethan calling my name from another room, or checking the cameras, or asking where I was. Instead, there was nothing. Just quiet. I slept for almost 9 hours without waking once. The next morning, Elena introduced me to the attorney she'd been talking about. Rachel Kim. She greeted me with a firm handshake instead of a sympathetic smile. "I've read the notes Elena sent me." I braced myself for questions about divorce. Instead, she asked, "Do you still have copies of the financial records?" I nodded. "The screenshots too?" "Yes." She looked thoughtful for a moment. "Claire, I don't think this is only about ending a marriage." "What do you mean?" I think someone has spent a long time taking control of your identity, your finances, and your legal records. The room fell silent. Rachel closed her notebook. I don't want to give them time to clean anything up. She looked directly at me. I'd like to go back to that house with law enforcement before Ethan has the chance to make anything disappear. The police officer met us outside the house. It wasn't dramatic. No flashing lights, no shouting. Just one patrol car, one officer, Rachel, Marcus, and me. Rachel had already explained that we were there to collect my personal belongings and important documents. Stay with me, she quietly said before we walked in. I will. Ethan opened the front door before we even knocked. He looked calm. Too calm. There you are, he said, looking straight at me. I've been worried sick. He spoke to the officer with the same polite smile I'd seen 1,000 times. I just want my wife to come home. She's been under a lot of emotional stress. Before I could respond, Judith appeared carrying a thick blue binder. I think this may help everyone understand the situation. She handed it directly to Rachel. I've been documenting Claire's behavior for months. Rachel accepted it without saying a word. Judith sounded almost proud. We were trying to protect her. The officer glanced at Rachel. Rachel simply nodded. We'll review it. That was all. No argument, no accusation. For some reason, Judith looked pleased by Rachel's quiet reaction. Rachel leaned toward me. You collect your documents. I'll read. I nodded. Walking through that house felt strange. Everything looked exactly the same. Rosie's toys were still in the living room. My favorite coffee mug was still beside the sink. It looked like my life. It just didn't feel like mine anymore. I found my passport in Ethan's desk drawer. Not where we'd always kept it. Rosie's birth certificate was inside a locked file cabinet Judith unlocked after the officer asked for it. Even then, she hesitated before handing it over. I was keeping these somewhere safe. Rachel didn't even look up from the binder. I'm sure you believed that. She kept turning pages. Every few minutes she'd place a small sticky note on another section. Finally, she looked at me. Claire. I walked over. She opened the binder. One page showed a photo of me crying while holding Rosie. Another described me as emotionally unstable because I'd forgotten a grocery list. Another claimed I'd become agitated after asking why my debit card stopped working. None of it was technically false. It was just incomplete. Every page left out what happened before or after. Rachel quietly closed the binder. They've documented ordinary reactions. What does that mean? They've removed the context. She flipped to another page. This says you became irrational after your car disappeared for a weekend. I looked at it. They forgot to mention nobody asked before taking it. Rachel nodded. Exactly. Page after page looked the same. A real event. Followed by a completely different interpretation. For the first time, I understood why I'd started questioning my own memory. If someone rewrites enough ordinary moments, eventually they stop looking ordinary. As I packed more papers into a box, Rachel called my name again. Have you found the vehicle title? I think it's in the filing cabinet. I searched every folder, insurance papers, tax records, old warranties. Finally, I found the registration. I smiled with relief. Then I actually read it. My smile disappeared. The registered owner wasn't my name anymore. It wasn't Ethan's either. It listed Callaway Property Services, the company owned by Ethan's family. I looked up at Rachel. My car. My voice barely came out. I bought this before we got married. Rachel took the document from my hands. She read it once. Then she read it again. Without saying a word, she slipped it into her evidence folder. Rachel never rushed to call anything fraud. She kept reminding me that assumptions didn't win cases. Evidence did. For nearly a week, every meeting started the same way. We verify first. Sometimes that meant calling banks. Sometimes it meant requesting records. Sometimes it meant waiting days for documents to arrive. I wanted answers. Rachel wanted proof nobody could dispute. One afternoon, she called me into her office. Several folders covered the conference table. "I think we're finally seeing the full picture." She slid the first file toward me. Credit reports, business filings, loan records. Then I saw my name. Again and again. My stomach dropped. There has to be some mistake. Rachel slowly shook her head. I wish there was. I kept reading. There was a business line of credit I'd never requested. Commercial accounts I'd never heard of. Several loans listed me as a personal guarantor for debts connected to Callaway Property Services. I never signed any of these. I know. Rachel tapped one page. That's exactly why we're investigating. Some signatures looked inconsistent. Others appeared to have been submitted electronically using accounts I no longer controlled. Nothing had been officially confirmed yet, but none of it looked legitimate. I leaned back in my chair. I thought they just wanted to control me. Rachel folded her hands. I think controlling you made something else much easier. What? If you weren't managing your own money, if you weren't checking your accounts, if you weren't working anymore, you wouldn't notice someone using your identity. Everything suddenly connected. The bank account, my missing documents, losing my job, even the car. None of it had happened by chance. Rachel handed me another document. This one is important. I recognized it immediately. My resignation email. The one Ethan claimed he'd sent because I was overwhelmed after Rosie's birth. This copy included technical data from my former employer. Rachel pointed to a single line. It originated from Ethan's office computer. I looked at the timestamp. At that exact moment, I'd been home feeding Rosie lunch. I even still had a photo I'd texted Marcus that afternoon. There was no possible way I'd written that email. For the first time, I stopped questioning my own memory. I hadn't imagined any of it. A few days later, the forensic specialist finished reviewing the backup from my old laptop along with the digital records Rachel had legally obtained. He opened a recovered folder. At first, it looked ordinary. Budgets, insurance files, household paperwork. Then another set of folders appeared. Behavior log, parenting concerns, incident timeline. Rachel opened them one by one. Every file described something that had actually happened, but each event had been stripped of context. One report claimed I was emotionally unstable because I cried after Rosie had a high fever. Another described me as irrational for asking why money had disappeared from our account. There were cropped screenshots, edited timelines, notes that left out entire conversations. Every document pushed the same conclusion. Not that I was being controlled, that I couldn't be trusted. Then the specialist recovered one final file. Its title was simple, If Claire Leaves. Inside were message drafts prepared for relatives, neighbors, former coworkers, and even parents from Rosie's playgroup. Every version repeated the same story, that I'd suffered a serious mental health breakdown, that Ethan was protecting our daughter, that people shouldn't contact me because it would make my condition worse. They hadn't written those messages after I left. They'd written them long before. I slowly closed the laptop. For months, part of me had hoped Ethan would eventually admit he'd gone too far. That hope disappeared right there. This wasn't panic. It wasn't a misunderstanding. Someone had planned for the day I walked away. Rachel organized every document into evidence folders. We're not proving one bad decision, she said. We're proving a pattern. I nodded. Just then, her assistant entered with a sealed envelope from the courthouse. Rachel opened it, read the first page, and looked at me. The hearing has been scheduled. In only a few weeks, I'd finally be sitting across the courtroom from Ethan and Judith, with every piece of evidence ready to be examined. Walking into that courtroom felt strangely familiar. Not because I'd ever been there before, because for nearly 2 years, I'd been defending myself every single day. Only this time, someone was finally listening. Rachel leaned toward me before the hearing began. Don't react to anything they say. Let them tell their story first. I nodded, even though my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Across the room, Ethan looked exactly like the man everyone believed him to be. Calm, neatly dressed, concerned. He even smiled politely when our eyes met. Judith sat beside him with a thick binder resting on her lap. She looked confident, almost excited. When the judge entered, everyone stood. The hearing started with Ethan's attorney describing him as a devoted husband who had spent months trying to help a wife struggling after childbirth. He never raised his voice. Every sentence sounded thoughtful. He only wanted to keep his daughter safe. Then Judith stood. She walked to the front carrying the same thick binder I'd seen when we returned to the house. I've documented everything, she said, for months. She handed it to the judge. I was afraid no one would believe us if Claire's condition became worse. Page after page supposedly showed evidence that I was emotionally unstable. Photos of me crying, notes about forgotten appointments, screenshots of text messages, short video clips. Taken one at a time, they looked convincing. I could feel people in the courtroom quietly watching me. For a second, I wondered if this was happening all over again. Rachel didn't interrupt. She didn't object. She simply waited. When Ethan's attorney finished, Rachel stood. Your Honor, we'd like to begin with the digital evidence. The courtroom monitor turned on. The first exhibit wasn't dramatic. It was a timeline, password changes, bank access restrictions, security system updates. Every event was matched with dates and electronic records. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Then came the resignation email. The forensic specialist explained how email metadata works in simple language. He pointed to the originating device. The message did not come from Mrs. Dawson. It originated from a workstation assigned to Mr. Ethan Calloway. The courtroom fell completely silent. Ethan looked toward his attorney for the first time. The specialist continued. He explained how deleted files could still leave traces, how timestamps could be verified, how login records connected different devices. Rachel never exaggerated anything. She simply let the evidence speak. Next came the videos Judith had submitted. The forensic analyst displayed the original recordings beside the edited versions. One clip showed me crying while holding Rosie. Judith had presented it as proof that I was emotionally unstable. The original recording continued another 40 seconds. It showed Rosie burning with a high fever while I begged Ethan to help me get her to urgent care. Another clip cut out the moment Ethan admitted he'd changed our bank passwords. Another removed nearly an entire conversation before showing my reaction. One by one, the context came back. Each edit told a completely different story. Rachel looked toward the judge. The issue isn't that Mrs. Dawson cried. The issue is that every piece of evidence was intentionally stripped of the reason she was crying. The judge slowly closed the binder Judith had proudly handed over earlier. Then Rachel presented another folder. Recovered planning documents, draft messages, behavior logs, digital records created months before I ever left the house. Rachel didn't even need to explain why they mattered. The dates explained everything. The judge spent several quiet moments reviewing the timeline. Finally, he looked directly at Judith. His voice remained calm. Mrs. Calloway, if your daughter-in-law's behavior only became concerning after she left the home. He paused, holding up one of the recovered documents. Can you explain why these files documenting her supposed instability began months before she ever attempted to leave? Judith didn't answer the judge right away. For the first time since the hearing began, she looked uncertain. Rachel didn't interrupt the silence. She simply placed another document on the evidence table. It showed the dates those behavior logs had been created. Months before I'd ever left the house. months before anyone could claim I had become unstable. The judge looked back at Judith. So I'll ask again. Why were these records being prepared long before Mrs. Dawson attempted to leave? Judith glanced at Ethan. He stared straight ahead. She swallowed. It wasn't supposed to look like this. Rachel spoke quietly. Then tell the court what it was supposed to look like. Another long pause. Finally, Judith sighed. Our finances weren't good. Her voice sounded much smaller than before. Ethan's business wasn't bringing in enough. The loans were becoming a problem. Rachel nodded once. And keeping Claire financially dependent made those problems easier to hide? Judith didn't argue, she just lowered her head. Yes. The courtroom stayed silent. Nobody gasped, nobody whispered. It was almost stranger that way. After everything I'd questioned about myself for so long, the truth came out in one simple word. Yes. The judge spent several minutes reviewing the evidence before giving his temporary ruling. Rosie would remain with me. Ethan would have supervised visitation only. He was prohibited from accessing my personal accounts, electronic devices, financial records, or private information without legal authorization. I looked over at Ethan. He didn't look angry. He looked exhausted, like someone who had finally realized there wasn't another explanation left to offer. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited near the entrance. Rachel quietly guided us through another exit instead. I think you've had enough attention for one day, she said. I laughed. It was the first real laugh I'd heard from myself in a very long time. The weeks that followed weren't magically easy. There were meetings with banks, insurance companies, investigators. More paperwork than I thought any one person could sign. The company where Ethan worked opened an internal investigation after learning his office computer had been used to send forged documents. Not long afterward, he lost his job. Several loans connected to my identity were frozen while investigators reviewed the fraud claims. The title to my car was eventually restored. The legal process involving the forged documents and identity theft continued long after the custody hearing ended. Some questions still hadn't been answered. Some probably never would. Rosie was too young to understand any of it. She only cared that bedtime became peaceful again. Nobody was pounding on the bedroom door. Nobody was checking where I went every hour. Nobody questioned every decision I made as her mother. One evening, Marcus stopped by with takeout. Rosie was stacking blocks on the living room floor while we ate dinner from paper containers. He watched her for a minute before looking at me. You apologize a lot less now. I hadn't even noticed. He smiled. I'm glad. That simple observation stayed with me. For months, I'd apologized for taking up space, for asking questions, for spending money, for being tired, for needing help. Somewhere along the way, I'd stopped. The biggest victory wasn't watching Ethan lose his job. It wasn't getting my car back. It wasn't even winning in court. It was hearing an official decision that confirmed something I'd almost forgotten to believe. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't an unstable mother. I had been living inside a system designed to make me doubt my own judgment, and once I understood that, trusting myself slowly became possible again. Even now, one sentence still catches my attention whenever I hear it. Let me handle that for you. Maybe it's offered with kindness. Maybe it really is help. But I also know control rarely announces itself. Sometimes it arrives one small decision at a time until you forget you were ever making your own. If this story meant something to you, I hope it reminds you to trust the quiet voice inside you when something doesn't feel right. And if you've lived through something similar, or know someone who has, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might help someone else realize they're not alone. If you enjoy real-life family drama stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to Van's Rock Stories so you won't miss the next one. Thanks for spending your time with me today. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next story.